Gone on too long without a drinking game, at least for those of us up here. And so we have decided, oh, Sarah is still here. Hi, Sarah. So every time anyone mentions the word resilience, we're going to have a swig. I don't know if one bottle's enough, so I just want to tell my team, don't be shy. If we end up hitting resilience a lot. So, so here we are. We're going to talk about a resilient nation strengthening our places, and we've got a wonderful panel here. Lauren Alexander Augustine is director of the program on risk, resilience, and extreme events for the National Academy of Sciences. And
resilience.
Yep. Yeah. It's definitely not going to be enough. And you're off this next week to Zurich to talk to Zurichians about what we're doing on this subject here in, I need to slow down a little bit, on this subject here, around the country. We also have Rolf Pendall. Rolf is director of the Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center at the Urban Institute. Fantastic guy. I really recommend, if you're into this, if you're a real wonk in the weeds on this subject, he's wonderful to read. And then we have Zack Rosenburg, who's co-founder and CEO of the St. Bernard Project, which has we're going to talk all about in a little bit. But I think, so pre-prepared, resilience in a way is such a broad term. It could mean, weathering the immediate crisis or containing the aftermath, coming back and recovering, adapting and learning. But with all due respect to our topic of the day, it's also beginning to feel a bit religious to me. Sort of anything, it's sort of everywhere, defining everything. Anything a city might do that's new and modern can be tucked under that wing of resilience. And I'm interested, if it's everywhere, is it really anywhere? And so, Rolf, I want to ask you to help distill for us what the R word means.
The R word. Well,
in a real sense.
First, it's great to be here. Thank you for still being here in the audience after this long, excellent day. Okay, yeah. Well, excellent. I think resilience is sort of a fancy word for success under stress.
Success under stress.
Success under stress. That is, there are stresses of various kinds that our cities and our nation and the whole world face, and being able to weather those stresses and still succeed on a variety of measures is a good definition of the R word. And I think
3 or 4 years ago, people didn't use the R word, right? It seemed like an odd, archaic term. Now, we probably set a world record today in the number of times the R word has been said.
I think that's right. And there's been a shift from sustainability to resilience. Because sustainability is something...
Are they different? Do they mean the same thing?
I think they mean different things. I think sustainability is more about achieving some mythic balance between equity, economy, and environment. There's like 6 or 7 other E's, I think, that people have worked out. But resilience is more like a process, and it involves thinking about governance and politics and the articulation. You drank after governance?
No, you said it, and I was slow. Yeah. It slips in there.
Yeah, I know it does. It's just like, it's as easy as a hot knife through butter. So it's about thinking about politics, it's about governance, and it's about the articulation of government with civil society and with business to do the kind of preparation that we need to face all kinds of challenges and threats.
So let's just say that we're 10 years into the future. If you were to, God, I don't even know, we need a new word, right? So if you were to look at the R word being well implemented, or implemented around, and I'm arguing that I sort of see it now being used to describe all sorts of initiatives, which ones will have traction, which ones will matter, and which ones will be a waste of time and undermine the meaning and sensibility of resilience?
Well, I think developing the metrics for success that really matter to us.
So what are the metrics of success?
I think we need to really consider how the most vulnerable among us are doing at every moment, and ask the question whether we're succeeding now, and of course we're not succeeding now, under the face of huge kinds of stresses and challenges. And those stresses and challenges can even be positive stresses and positive challenges. It's sort of like, going through 7th grade. I have someone who just finished 7th grade in my house. Did anybody here enjoy 7th grade?
I did.
Okay, so you're weird. Your parents might not have. But it's obviously a process you have to go through. It's a process in which there's a huge challenge of growing, of you changing, of you developing an identity. Immigration to communities is another example of a stress to a community.
It can also strengthen a community.
But it can also strengthen the community. And so thinking about what our metrics are for success under those conditions, thinking about how the most vulnerable among us do as a result of them, that to me is the metric that we should be looking to. And then looking back, sort of retrospectively, and saying, did we protect and in fact advance the lives of the most vulnerable in our communities? That would be a definition of the success that I'd be looking for.
I want to jump to Lauren
myself.
in a second, and you guys could comment on each other's stuff, but be ruthless for a moment on a scale of 0 to 10. How well has New Orleans, in the definition you just described, done on the resilience scale?
The statistics that we've seen today, brought in, with far too many people still living below the poverty line, African Americans still far too segregated from whites and Hispanics in this community, and too many people being too far from opportunity. It says that it's not over yet, but that was a condition before Katrina too.
So you give them a 3?
Sorry?
A 3? A
well,
4?
No, I think it's too soon.
Okay, 2.
No, I think I still think it's too. I think it's too soon to say. Are the systems working better now to get there than they were before the storm? I think the balance of the evidence suggests that yes, most of the systems in New Orleans today are aligned in ways, and they're coordinated in ways, and certainly the storm infrastructure is much more prepared than it was before the storm. But that's not to say there isn't a long way to go, too.
Now, Lauren, you were telling me in your work at the National Academy of Sciences, and I hope I'm not getting you in trouble here, that, I mean, you're the cool cat, right? So you're doing this stuff. You reach into a lot of different pockets. You're a big believer in stakeholder dynamics, and the National Academy is this complex place with a lot of different fiefdoms. And you were telling me they originally didn't know what to do with you.
That's right. That's right. This is a common. So that's right.
It's common they didn't know what to do with you.
This is a growing theme. But what you're referring to is that when we started with this disaster resilience business, it came out in one of our very esteemed Blue Ribbon reports in 2012. It's chaired by Susan Cutter. It's a blue book. You might have seen it. And usually at the Academy, when a federal agency or several agencies say, can you help us with a set of questions, we provide the advice and we say, good luck with that. But in this case, people came back to us and said, can you help us implement this? And I said, well, and so I went up to the highest levels of leadership in my institution, and I said, this is what we're getting. And the president said, well, you can do that. I was like, but, we don't do this. He said, no, you do this. So we started this project, the Resilient America Project, that takes a lot of these scientific,
Really, I know it may look silly, but it's really a lot of fun.
And you guys wish you were up here. We started this Resilient America Project. And what it does is it takes a lot of these processes of science and policy speak, and we work in 4 communities around the country.
Name them.
I can. Seattle, Washington, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Charleston, South Carolina, and right now I have staff in Tornado Alley, a city in Oklahoma, and I hope to be able to announce them soon. Oh. And we went and we said, you want to talk to us about disaster resilience? And everyone said, we don't want to talk about natural disasters. We want to talk about economic resilience, drink, and we want to talk about vulnerable populations. So really, when
they don't care about natural disasters.
Well, it's not that they don't care about it, but it goes to what Craig Fugate was saying earlier. Right. It's not an emergency management issue. It goes beyond what you're capable of, planning for. It's about what can happen. And when you think about what can happen, and you think about jobs, and you think about poverty, and you think about people who are already on the edge, and anything happening beyond that, it gets pretty rough.
And what can science bring to those?
Yes. Well, we had a brilliant artist earlier, Brandon Odume, and he said that artists were like the alchemists, right? He said that they take something and they turn into something else. And so this is what we're trying to do with science as well. We need a little touch of that artist alchemy because we as scientists are not always great at communicating in terms that we understand, like probability and statistics, because people want information so they can make a decision. What do I do? And we say, well, we are 95% chance that this is going to happen. We're pretty certain, and people are like, what can I do? So we're working with this broad stakeholder group. We're working with artists. We're working with social scientists, educators, the whole gamut, private sector, public sector, to say, what kinds of information do you need? What kind of formats do you need it in? And can this scientific information go through an alchemy process to take a form that you can understand and take a form that you can actually work with to make decisions that make your community better?
So excuse me for asking this, but I have to.
Okay.
So you're working in communities, in a number of the communities you're working with. I don't think I'm out of line suggesting that science is not the biggest animator or driver, and is somewhat under siege in some part. Do you have a problem talking to these communities about things like climate change, and is that why they don't want to talk about natural disasters? Is they're sort of not in the mode of thinking about the scientific underpinnings of some of this?
That has yes, we do run into that, and so
a lot, a little.
To varying degrees, So in a place like Seattle, we don't run into that, right? But to varying degrees, we do. But when you think about the risks, that's on the front side, and Karen Durham-Aguilera talked about risks and earlier, and that stuff it's kind of fuzzy. But when you talk about consequences, people are starting to understand that. And you say, well, listen, we don't need to talk about the cause of an increased cyclone cycle or nuisance flooding or increased flooding, but if you have flooding now and it's costing you money, because it is, flooding is something that costs every one of us billions of dollars every year. So if you have that, what do you do? Are you ready for it to increase, either in intensity, in depth, in frequency? And those are issues you can really get around, because again, it's about getting to what can you do.
Now, Zack, you are in the game. You came here after the disaster, and tell us what the St. Bernard Project has set out to do.
So in New Orleans, we build houses for folks who can't afford to rebuild their houses on their own. And you'd think almost 10 years now, in a day or two, 10 years after the storm, that the problem should be over. And I want to tell you one story. 2.5 weeks ago, into our office walked a 94-year-old man who shares the same birthday as I do, and he was a World War II veteran. He, in fact, was the first generation of his family not to be enslaved. So his father was enslaved and then was a sharecropper. And he went off to fight for this country and came back and built his own house with his 2 hands. This gentleman, for the last 9 years, has been living too proud to ask for help in a house that was still storm damaged. The siding was ripped off on one side. You can see the outside of the house from the inside of the house, which you're not supposed to. And so we build houses for folks who can't afford to do it on their own. And listen, let me be super clear. New Orleans' recovery has been tremendous. But I don't think that America can be whole until this recovery is complete. And so we've got to celebrate all the good work to do, but still be mindful that this recovery is not over. And I think there's no better example than folks of that greatest generation.
Since you're on the ground, and I've read a lot about what you've been doing, in particular training young people and giving them skills they wouldn't otherwise have, and a lot of these are at-risk youth, and working with them. And one of the things I didn't get into with Craig Fugate today was that he said some years ago that all of the support mechanisms that the country has developed has created a culture where people look at themselves as victims. It's a victim orientation, not something where people understand that they need to challenge that and to pick up their bootstraps and work or be engaged. And I'm interested in what you think about that.
Nonsense.
Okay.
Pure, offensive, absurd nonsense. Our clients in New Orleans, in New York, in New Jersey, and Joplin, Missouri, when we were working there, now in San Marcos, Texas. We were taught, I think so many of us, that in America, if you work, you're supposed to work hard, buy a house. That's success. And if you do that, things can only get but so bad. The people who need our help are the folks who have done that. These were our stakeholders. These were the givers and the doers and those who provided for others. So I think it's simplistic, absurd nonsense to say that those who have been victimized, and at least in New Orleans we'll say victimized because the flood, as everyone knows, was caused by the failure of the federal levee system here. To paint them as complicit in their own situation is overly simplistic. And
do you think, someone tweeted to me today that perhaps one of the things that's missing in today's discussion, which has been so expansive, is an accountability, a thinking about our own assessments of what has been done, that we've gone a little bit soft, a little bit corrupt, if you will, in the way we think about it. And I know that you're a big driver on changing the way we think about how we measure what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's right now in post-disaster recovery, there's a fidelity to process. So we started the St. Bernard Project when, I guess, 9 years and 20 pounds ago. We had come to visit New Orleans, and after volunteering and getting to know folks who remind us of our own family, we wanted to know when they'd be able to move home. And so we went to the traditional actors and said, when is the building going to start? And we got this very cavalier answer, which was, we've done disaster recovery the same way for the last 30 years. Why would we change? Building is phase 2, if not phase 3. And you can't do phase 3 before phase 1, so you wouldn't. And we're not there yet. What America needs, there's an adage that we all know that you achieve what you measure, right? We've all heard that. So if you measure process, you're going to achieve a pristine process. If we measure outcomes, how many people are home, by when, what's the cost, then that's going to be pulling the thread instead of pushing it. And so one challenge that we're putting out there to the community is for disaster-impacted communities and for the institutional actors, we would very much like stakes to be placed in the ground and benchmarks and say, by year X, we'll get 1/3 of the population home. By year Y, 2/3, and it will have an end. It's very hard. Listen, I don't think the recovery here is over, but I think we need to set a time and define what success looks like and then drive to it rather than follow process and say, hey, we've done it the right way when it's inconsistent with the results.
Rolf, how do you agree?
I agree, but I think there are probably things that we need, something that's more like a thermostat. Because there are situations that will, for example, drive the poverty rate high. And so we really need the success by a certain time, but we also need to pay attention to what happens after that time and think about, about a commitment to non-degradation of that success over time. And so sustaining a commitment to improvement even beyond then, and not saying, okay, the game is over. That too, I think, is part of the definition of what being a resilient city or being a resilient region, 2 sips, right?
Finish it.
Is going to have to mean.
We have 2 minutes and 45 seconds, so better hurry.
Can I add one thing? In order to measure where you want to go, you have to have a good sense of where you are and where you start. And the baseline assessments of any community is really critical before you can say, well, we have achieved this and this, based on where you came from.
And I think that's the critical thing about organizations like the Data Center and other community data intermediaries throughout the United States. Urban is the hub of the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, which is in between 35 and 40 cities nationwide. These partnership partners take different formats in different cities. They're usually almost entirely outside of government, so they're part of the civic infrastructure for doing what you might think of as collectively trying to gain foresight and building the kinds of relationships that come with understanding your social reality together. So the Data Center and other centers like it are successful because they bring people together, they bring institutions together, and they allow us to reason and think about what might be as well as what is right now.
So I want to take at least one question, because we're just out of time again. It's crazy. But one question from the audience. And as you're thinking of that, I want to ask for a quick response to this. The Rockefeller Foundation has funded this Resilient Cities initiative.
Yes.
I'm done.
You're done? Yeah. So, and when it comes to
Not supposed to really
resilience
drink,
officers...
Zack.
Oh,
yes.
So there are 100 cities that have resilient, I'll get to the drink in a minute, 100 resilient city officers. What do you think? So we're talking here about New Orleans today, but you're dealing with 4 different locations, and you've got people over. What do you think, given the fact that disasters or problems can happen in so many different arenas, what do you think the most important DNA change that officer can make in a city when you have no idea necessarily what's coming at you or what the problems will be? What do they do to change the DNA code of a city? What's the most important thing?
I think that one thing, maybe not the most important thing, but the one that comes to mind first, is that when something happens, it often goes, the responsibility goes immediately to the emergency management agency or office. And in this case, the CRO in the Rockefeller cities is more of a central hub that will include emergency management, but it also can bring in health and human services, can bring in housing, can bring in environment, can bring in...
So they're an aggregator.
I think so,
Okay.
you know, and we'll see.
Rolf?
I would say go regional. That is, the chief resilient officer has a lot of work to do within the city. But a city isn't an island for the most part. Cities have suburban neighbors, and cities have state and federal government. So if all those units can work together, instead of each one being the domino that falls, then expecting the next level up, as Administrator Fugate says, to sort of expect to do the next thing. Building that articulated governance system is going to be critical.
Zach? Can you say the word resilience?
Yeah. Oh,
The way to get to resilience. So I think it's a shared identity, and it's an understanding that various components of the community are in it together.
Right.
And so that there don't have to be losers, that someone else's interest is as important as mine. And I think part of the brilliance of the 100 Resilient City is situating the CRO right below the mayor. And so there's authority across the spectrum, not merely too vertical.
So, questions, comments? Really quick, as we're 1 minute and 3 seconds over.
Or bring more beer.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm
more beer.
Angelique Walker-Smith from Bread for the World in Washington, D.C. And my question has to do with the place of religion and faith that I've heard very, very little of today, and I'm really very surprised by that because, as we know, many faith communities have contributed so much to the rebuilding and the resilience, there you go, of this community. So what say you more about religion and faith and the sacred dimensions of this place and the future of this community?
Lauren?
When we work in our communities, thank you for your question, we really do cut across the breadth of the fabric of the community. So we do have the government there, the local government, but we really rely very heavily on the NGO community, the community organizations, which often include the faith-based organizations. And the reasons that we really focus on these organizations in our communications in our communities is because they have greater reach into a wide, and they have a greater reach deeply into the community that the government really does not have. So in our work, in the Resilient America, the Academy's work, we really do rely very heavily on the faith-based organizations and other NGO community organizations too. Thank you.
Responses, Rolf? No? Zach?
So I think this is emblematic of the faith-based community, but also of America in general, that we've discovered there's something endemic or essential or hardwired in people, and that's they're compulsed to fix and solve and help. We've had over 100,000 volunteers. More than 90% of them have zero tie to New Orleans besides their humanity. Yet they came down here, spent their money, their vacation time, doing work that's far outside of their comfort zone to rebuild other people's homes. And that's what gives me hope for America's future. And to be sure, the faith-based community was at the lead, but I don't think it can be essentialized to that.
Thank you all. This has been a great discussion of Resilient Nation.
Okay.
We're all three. Yeah, you can finish your beer now. Thank you for allowing us to have a beer with all of you and discuss this. A big round of applause to Lauren Alexander Augustine of the National Academy of Sciences, Rolf Pendall of the Urban Institute, and Zack Rosenburg with the St. Bernard Project. And I would tell you, after the next session with Gwen Eiffel, we'll brilliantly organize. I hear a big surprise is coming, so hang out. It'll be fun. It'll be more than a bottle of beer.